I stared at the legal document in my trembling hands, reading the same devastating words over and over again. Eviction notice. Forced sale. 30 days to vacate the property my great-great-grandfather had built with his own hands in 1887. The HOA president, Corinne Williams, stood on my front porch with a satisfied smirk, flanked by two security guards like she was some kind of federal marshal. Her voice cut through the morning air like a rusty blade. "You should have listened when we gave you the chance to comply voluntarily. Now the county will handle this matter for us." I looked past her at the pristine suburban houses that had sprouted up around my family land like mushrooms after rain. Perfect lawns, identical mailboxes, cookie-cutter dreams built on ground my ancestors had farmed for over a century. These people had no idea who they were messing with. They had no clue about the documents gathering dust in my grandfather's old trunk upstairs. That was the moment I realized they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. They forgot to check who actually owned this entire town. The harassment started on a Tuesday morning in September when I found the first violation notice taped to my front door. Bright orange paper fluttering in the autumn breeze like a warning flag. The Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association had formed just 6 months earlier, when the last of the new subdivisions reached completion around my property. I had lived on this land my entire life, just like my father before me and his father before him. 5 generations of my family had called this place home, working the soil, raising children, and maintaining the original farmhouse that anchored our 20-acre plot right in the center of what was now called Riverside Meadows. The violation notice listed 7 different infractions. My barn was apparently too close to the property line. The vegetable garden my grandmother had planted in 1952 violated landscaping standards. The gravel driveway needed to be paved with approved materials. Even the old oak tree that had shaded our front porch since before the Civil War was somehow a violation because it dropped leaves on the sidewalk. I crumpled the paper in my fist and walked to my truck. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the community center conference room facing 5 people I had never seen before in my life. They called themselves the HOA Board of Directors. Corinne Williams, a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and cold blue eyes, introduced herself as the president. "Mr. Thompson, we appreciate you coming in today," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "We understand this property has been in your family for some time, but now that we have established proper community standards, everyone needs to comply with our covenants and restrictions." I tried to explain that my property existed long before their subdivision, long before their rules, long before they had even moved to this county. Corinne cut me off with a wave of her manicured hand. "The law is the law, Mr. Thompson. Your property is now part of our planned community whether you like it or not. You have 30 days to bring everything into compliance or face escalating fines and legal action." That night I sat on my front porch where 4 generations of Thompson men had sat before me, looking out at the twinkling lights of houses that had not existed 5 years ago. The developers had bought up every farm and vacant lot for miles in every direction, turning rolling pastures into streets with names like Magnolia Lane and Sunset Ridge. I called my attorney the next morning, a family friend named Jim Patterson who had handled our legal affairs for decades. He reviewed the violation notice and shook his head. "This is aggressive even by HOA standards," Jim told me over coffee at the kitchen table where I had eaten breakfast every morning for 43 years. "They are targeting you specifically because your property does not fit their suburban aesthetic. But Dave, fighting this could cost more than just fixing the violations." 2 weeks later, 3 more violation notices appeared on my door. The HOA had apparently hired someone to walk my property line every few days, photographing anything they could claim violated their standards. They wanted me to remove the chicken coop where my family had raised poultry since the 1920s. They demanded I tear down the workshed my grandfather had built to store farm equipment. They even cited me for having too many different types of plants in what they called my front yard landscaping. The fines started at $50 per violation per day. Within a month, I owed over $2,000 to an organization I had never agreed to join, for rules I had never agreed to follow, on land my family had owned since before their grandparents were born. That was when I knew this was not about community standards or property values. This was war. Corinne Williams drove past my house every morning at exactly 7:30, slowing down to stare at my property like a predator studying prey. I started timing her routine from my kitchen window, watching her white Lexus SUV cruise down the dirt road that connected my driveway to the main subdivision streets. She had moved to Riverside Meadows 2 years earlier from some big city up north, buying the largest house in the development and immediately volunteering for every committee and board position available. The other homeowners elected her HOA president within 6 months, seduced by her promises to maintain property values and enforce strict community standards. Corinne made it clear that my family farm was her primary target. Your property is an eyesore that threatens everyone's investment in this community, she announced during a packed HOA meeting in October. We cannot allow one holdout to drag down property values for hundreds of families who chose to live in a well-maintained suburban neighborhood. The audience of suburban homeowners nodded along as Corinne clicked through a slideshow of photographs she had taken of my property. My barn, my garden, my gravel driveway, even my mailbox were presented as evidence of blight and neglect. She had somehow made my family's century-old homestead look like an abandoned junkyard through careful camera angles and selective editing. We have attempted to work with Mr. Thompson through reasonable requests and violation notices, Corinne continued, her voice rising with righteous indignation. But he has shown complete disregard for our community standards and legal authority. Therefore, the board has voted to pursue all available legal remedies to bring his property into compliance. The harassment escalated dramatically after that meeting. Corinne recruited neighbors to document every aspect of my daily routine, creating a surveillance network that would have impressed the secret police. They photographed me working in my garden, feeding my chickens, and repairing equipment in my workshed. They measured the height of my grass and counted the number of vehicles parked in my driveway. The violation notices became absurd. I was cited for hanging laundry on a clothesline that had existed since before electricity reached our county. They fined me for storing firewood in the same spot my family had stacked winter fuel for 80 years. They even claimed my vegetable garden violated restrictions on agricultural activities in residential areas. Corinne hired a law firm that specialized in HOA enforcement, and suddenly I was drowning in legal paperwork. Liens appeared on my property for unpaid fines that had ballooned to over $15,000. Court summons demanded my appearance for violation hearings where I had no representation and no voice in defending myself. The emotional toll became overwhelming. I stopped sleeping through the night, jerking awake at every sound outside my bedroom window. The constant stress triggered health problems that sent me to the emergency room twice in November. My blood pressure medication was no match for the anxiety of wondering what new attack would arrive in each day's mail. Corinne seemed to take personal pleasure in my suffering. She would smile and wave when she drove past my house, sometimes stopping to take more photographs or measure distances between my buildings and the property line. Her husband, a quiet man who worked in insurance, would sit in their car looking uncomfortable while Corinne prowled around my land like she owned it. The final ultimatum came in a certified letter delivered on Thanksgiving morning. The HOA demanded complete compliance with all outstanding violations within 30 days or face forced sale of my property to recover unpaid fines and legal fees. They claimed authority to seize my family land and auction it to the highest bidder. I sat alone at my kitchen table that Thanksgiving, staring at the legal documents while my turkey dinner grew cold on the plate. 4 generations of my family had celebrated holidays in this house, passing down stories and traditions that would die with me if Corinne Williams got her way. Outside my window, the lights twinkled in hundreds of identical houses, filled with families who had no idea their perfect suburban paradise was built on stolen history. They trusted Corinne to protect their investment and maintain their property values, not knowing she was destroying something far more valuable than money. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If Corinne Williams wanted a war over my family land, I would give her a war she would never forget. The county courthouse basement smelled like old paper and forgotten memories. I descended the narrow staircase into the records department for the first time since my father had brought me here as a teenager to research our family tree for a high school project. Margaret Henderson, the elderly clerk who had worked in the records office for over 40 years, recognized me immediately despite the stress lines that had aged my face considerably over the past few months. "Dave Thompson, I have not seen you down here since your daddy passed," she said warmly, leading me through rows of filing cabinets and storage boxes. "What brings you back to our dusty archives?" I explained my situation with the HOA, watching Margaret's expression darken as I described Corinne's harassment campaign and the threats to seize my family property. She shook her head in disgust. "That woman has been down here several times asking questions about property boundaries and zoning regulations," Margaret revealed. "I should have known she was up to no good. Your family has deeper roots in this county than anyone alive today, Dave. If anyone has standing to fight these bullies, it is you." Margaret pulled out boxes of documents I had never seen before, records that dated back to the original land grants issued when this area was still frontier territory. My hands trembled as I opened files containing paperwork signed by my great-great-grandfather Samuel Thompson in 1887. The original land patent, signed by the territorial governor himself, granted Samuel Thompson 640 acres for his service in establishing the first school and post office in what would eventually become Riverside County. The boundaries described in the legal document encompass not just my current 20 acres, but the entire area now occupied by the Riverside Meadows subdivision. "Dave, do you understand what this means?" Margaret whispered, spreading the yellowed documents across her desk. "Your family did not just own property in this area. Your family founded this entire community." We spent the next 4 hours digging through boxes of historical records, uncovering a treasure trove of documents that painted a picture of my family's central role in building the infrastructure of our county. Samuel Thompson had donated land for the first church, funded the construction of the original schoolhouse, and served as the first mayor when the township was officially incorporated in 1903. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Property deeds, tax records, newspaper clippings, and official correspondence all confirmed that the Thompson family had been the driving force behind every major development in the area for over a century. We had built roads, established businesses, and created the foundation upon which modern suburban development had eventually flourished. But the most shocking discovery came in a manila folder tucked away in a box labeled Municipal Incorporations 1901-910. Inside was the original charter for the Township of Riverside, signed into law by the state legislature in 1903. The document established the municipal boundaries, granted authority for local governance, and designated the powers of elected officials. According to the charter, any property owned continuously by the founding families maintained special protection from future zoning changes or municipal regulations without explicit consent of the property owner. The law had been written to prevent exactly what Corinne Williams and her HOA were attempting to do to my family land. "Margaret, is this still legally binding?" I asked, hardly daring to hope that a century-old law could save my property from modern bureaucratic tyranny. She smiled for the first time since I had arrived that morning. "Dave, municipal charters are the foundation of all local government authority. Unless this provision was specifically repealed by later legislation, it carries the full force of state law. Your property has legal protections that supersede any homeowners association regulations." I drove home that evening with a cardboard box full of photocopied documents and a growing sense of excitement I had not felt in months. Corinne Williams had underestimated her opponent by assuming I was just another powerless homeowner she could intimidate with legal threats and bureaucratic harassment. She had no idea she was fighting the founding family of the entire community she claimed to represent. She had overlooked the historical legacy that gave my property special legal status dating back to territorial days. Most importantly, she had forgotten to research whether her HOA actually had any authority over land that predated their existence by over a century. That night I spread the historical documents across my kitchen table, the same table where Samuel Thompson had signed the original township charter in 1903. 4 generations of my family had eaten meals, made decisions, and planned for the future in this very room. Tomorrow, I would begin the fight to ensure future generations could continue that tradition. Corinne Williams was about to learn that some battles cannot be won with violation notices and legal threats. Sometimes history itself rises up to defend what is right. Robert Martinez specialized in property rights law with a focus on historical land disputes. His office walls were covered with framed newspaper articles about David versus Goliath legal victories, where individual property owners had defeated powerful developers, corporations, and government agencies trying to seize their land. I had found his name through an internet search at 2 in the morning, desperately looking for attorneys who understood the complex intersection of historical property rights and modern zoning law. His website featured testimonials from clients who had faced impossible odds and won through careful legal strategy and thorough historical research. "Mr. Thompson, this is the most compelling case I have seen in 20 years of practice," Robert said after reviewing the documents Margaret Henderson and I had discovered in the courthouse basement. "Your family holds what we call original sovereign rights to this property, granted directly by territorial authority before modern municipal incorporation." He spread my historical documents across his conference table like a general planning a military campaign. The original land patent, township charter, and municipal incorporation papers created a legal foundation that would be nearly impossible for the HOA to challenge successfully. "Here is what we are going to do," Robert continued, his excitement building as he explained our strategy. We file a comprehensive legal response that challenges the fundamental authority of the Riverside Meadows HOA to regulate your property. We demand immediate dismissal of all violation notices, removal of all liens, and cessation of harassment based on your family's historical exemption from municipal regulations. The legal documents we prepared were devastating in their thoroughness. Robert had researched similar cases across the country, where historical property rights had trumped modern zoning regulations, and the precedent was overwhelmingly in our favor. Courts consistently ruled that original land grants and municipal charters created permanent legal protections that could not be violated by later legislative actions. But Robert suggested we go beyond just defending against the HOA's attacks. We should file countersuits against Corinne Williams and the HOA board for harassment, abuse of legal process, and violations of your constitutional rights, he advised. These people have exceeded any reasonable interpretation of their authority, and they need to face consequences for their actions. The countersuits we filed were comprehensive and aggressive. We accused Corinne Williams of conducting a personal vendetta disguised as community standards enforcement. We documented the surveillance, the excessive fines, the frivolous legal actions, and the emotional distress caused by months of systematic harassment. We also discovered that several HOA board members had potential conflicts of interest that violated state regulations governing homeowners associations. Corinne's husband worked for an insurance company that wrote policies for several local developers. Another board member owned a landscaping business that had submitted bids for mandatory property improvements the HOA was demanding from residents. The local newspaper picked up our story after Robert sent them a press release detailing the historical significance of my family's property and the legal battle with the HOA. The headline read, "Founding Family Fights Modern Land Grab," and the article presented a sympathetic portrait of my struggle against bureaucratic overreach. The story went viral on social media within hours of publication. Hundreds of people shared their own horror stories about HOA abuse and expressed support for my fight against Corinne Williams and her board of directors. The public attention transformed my private property dispute into a symbol of individual rights versus corporate-style authoritarianism. Corinne's response to our legal offensive was swift and vicious. She called an emergency HOA meeting and announced that my resistance to their authority was frivolous legal maneuvering by a bitter old man who refuses to accept progress. She claimed my property was a health hazard and demanded immediate county inspection of my buildings and grounds. But the county inspector who arrived at my house 3 days later was skeptical of the HOA's complaints from the moment he stepped out of his truck. Tom Bradley had been conducting property inspections for 15 years and immediately recognized harassment when he saw it. "Mr. Thompson, I have to ask, did you do something to make these HOA people angry?" Tom said after completing his inspection. "I have never seen violation notices this petty and vindictive. Your property is well maintained and poses no health or safety issues whatsoever." His official inspection report contradicted every claim the HOA had made about my property condition. Tom found no violations of county health codes, no safety hazards, and no legitimate grounds for the regulatory action Corinne Williams had demanded. The judge assigned to our case granted an emergency injunction, halting all HOA enforcement actions against my property pending resolution of the historical rights dispute. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without worrying about what new harassment would arrive in the morning mail. Corinne Williams had started this fight assuming She held all the advantages of organization, legal resources, and community support. She never imagined that her target would fight back with weapons more powerful than violation notices and legal threats. History itself was about to teach her a lesson she would never forget. The legal discovery process in civil litigation requires both sides to share relevant documents and evidence before trial. Karen Williams and the HOA board clearly expected this requirement to work in their favor, forcing me to reveal any weaknesses in my case while they maintained their position of apparent authority. They had no idea that discovery would expose the corrupt foundation of their entire harassment campaign. Robert Martinez filed comprehensive discovery requests demanding all HOA communications, financial records, board meeting minutes, and correspondence related to my property. Karen's attorneys fought to limit disclosure, but the judge ruled that my countersuits for harassment and abuse of process justified broad access to HOA internal documents. The first bombshell arrived in a box of Karen's personal emails that her attorneys were required to produce. Her correspondence with other board members revealed a calculated conspiracy to force me off my property for reasons that had nothing to do with community standards or property values. "We need to get Thompson out of there before the county rezones that area for commercial development," Karen had written to board member Patricia Collins 6 months before the first violation notice appeared on my door. "His property will be worth millions if the zoning change goes through, and we can pick it up for pennies on the dollar if we force him into bankruptcy with fines and legal fees." Robert and I stared at the email printouts in stunned silence. Karen Williams had never cared about covenant violations or community aesthetics. She had targeted my family property because she knew about planned zoning changes that would dramatically increase land values in our area. Further emails revealed that Karen had inside information about county development plans through her husband's insurance connections. She knew that my 20 acres sat directly in the path of a proposed shopping center expansion that would require multiple properties for assembly into a larger commercial parcel. "This is criminal conspiracy to commit fraud," Robert said, his voice tight with anger as we reviewed more damaging correspondence. "They used their HOA authority as a weapon to steal your property for personal profit. We are talking about serious felony charges here." The financial records were equally devastating. The HOA had established a legal fund specifically designated for enforcement actions against non-compliant properties. But the money was being used to pay for Karen's personal attorney fees in matters unrelated to homeowners association business. Board meeting minutes revealed that several members had questioned Karen's aggressive tactics against my property, but she had silenced opposition by threatening to expose their own violations of HOA regulations. She ruled the organization through intimidation and blackmail rather than democratic governance. The most shocking discovery came in a folder of documents Karen's attorneys had tried to keep confidential through claims of attorney-client privilege. Robert successfully argued that communications related to criminal conspiracy were not protected, and the judge ordered disclosure of Karen's correspondence with a local real estate developer. The emails revealed that Karen had already negotiated a secret agreement to sell my property to Riverside Development Corporation immediately after forcing me into foreclosure. The developer planned to demolish my family's century-old farmhouse and combine my land with adjacent parcels for a new strip mall anchored by a national chain restaurant. Karen would personally receive a finder's fee of $50,000 for facilitating the property transfer, plus guaranteed approval for a commercial loan to expand her husband's insurance business into the new development. She had turned the HOA into her personal profit-making enterprise while pretending to serve community interests. But the corruption extended beyond Corinne's leadership. Two other board members owned businesses that would directly benefit from commercial development in our area. Patricia Collins ran a property management company that had already submitted bids to manage retail spaces in the proposed shopping center. Board Treasurer Michael Barnes owned a construction company, positioning itself for landscaping contracts with the new development. None of these conflicts of interest had been disclosed to HOA members, violating state laws requiring transparency in homeowners association governance. The entire board had turned their regulatory authority into a criminal conspiracy designed to enrich themselves at the expense of community residents. Robert immediately amended our countersuits to include charges of racketeering, criminal conspiracy, and violations of state homeowners association regulations. We also filed complaints with the State Attorney General's office and the County District Attorney requesting criminal investigation of the HOA board's activities. Dave, this case has evolved far beyond a simple property dispute, Robert explained as we prepared for the next phase of litigation. We are now dealing with organized criminal activity disguised as community governance. These people belong in prison, not running a homeowners association. The local newspaper reporter who had written the original story about my legal battle was eager to investigate the corruption we had uncovered through discovery. His follow-up article, titled HOA Board Accused of Criminal Conspiracy in Land Grab Scheme, prompted calls for criminal investigation from county commissioners and state legislators. Corinne Williams had spent months portraying herself as a defender of community standards against my stubborn resistance to progress. The evidence revealed her true motivation was greed, pure and simple, wrapped in the false righteousness of bureaucratic authority. She was about to learn that criminal conspiracies eventually collapse under the weight of their own corruption, especially when they target families with deep roots and strong legal foundations. The Riverside Meadows Community Center had never hosted a more packed meeting in its brief history. Word about the criminal conspiracy charges against Corinne Williams and the HOA board had spread through social media and local news coverage, drawing residents who had never attended association meetings alongside reporters, county officials, and law enforcement representatives. I arrived with Robert Martinez 30 minutes before the scheduled start time, carrying boxes of historical documents and legal evidence that would finally reveal the truth about my family's founding role in the community. Margaret Henderson from the County Records Office had volunteered to present the historical research, bringing official county seals and documentation to verify every claim. Corinne Williams sat at the head table looking pale and desperate, flanked by her remaining board members and two attorneys who had clearly advised her to say as little as possible. The confident authority she had wielded for months had evaporated under the weight of criminal investigation and public scrutiny. The meeting began with Corinne attempting to maintain control through parliamentary procedure and appeals to community unity. "We are here tonight to address false accusations that threaten the stability of our homeowners association," she announced to the hostile crowd. "These legal attacks on your elected board are designed to undermine the property values and community standards we have all worked to maintain." A resident in the front row immediately challenged her narrative. "Corinne, we have read the newspaper articles about your secret deals with developers. How do you explain the emails planning to steal Mr. Thompson's property for personal profit?" Corinne's face flushed red as murmurs of agreement rippled through the packed room. Her attorneys whispered urgently in her ear, clearly advising silence, but Corinne's ego would not allow her to retreat without a fight. Dave Thompson refuses to accept that his old property cannot continue dragging down everyone's investment in this community, she responded, her voice rising with desperation. He is using frivolous historical claims to avoid basic compliance with reasonable regulations that apply to everyone else. That was my cue to stand and walk to the front of the room. The crowd fell silent as I took the microphone, facing neighbors who had watched Corinne Williams portray me as a stubborn troublemaker for over a year. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dave Thompson, and I would like to tell you about the real history of this community, I began, my voice steady despite months of accumulated anger and frustration. Margaret Henderson joined me at the front table, spreading out the original documents we had discovered in the courthouse basement. The original land patent granted to Samuel Thompson in 1887, the township charter signed in 1903, the municipal incorporation papers establishing Riverside as an official community. Every house in this subdivision sits on land originally owned by the Thompson family, I continued, watching the audience absorb the implications of the historical evidence. My great-great-grandfather Samuel Thompson founded this community, donated land for your schools and churches, and established the legal framework that still governs this county today. I held up the township charter, pointing to the specific provision protecting founding family properties from future regulatory interference. The legal language was clear and unambiguous, granting permanent exemption from municipal regulations without explicit property owner consent. According to state law and county charter, the Riverside Meadows HOA never had any legal authority over my family property, I announced. Every violation notice, every fine, every legal threat has been based on fraudulent claims of jurisdiction they do not possess. The room erupted in shocked conversation as residents realized they had been lied to about the fundamental legal basis for Corinne's harassment campaign. Several people stood to applaud, while others shouted questions about the criminal conspiracy charges. Corinne Williams made one final desperate attempt to maintain her authority. This is all ancient history that has no relevance to modern community standards, she declared, standing to face the hostile crowd. We cannot allow one property owner to claim exemption from rules that apply to everyone else based on century-old paperwork. The crowd's reaction was swift and brutal. Residents who had trusted Corinne to protect their interests were furious to learn she had used her position for personal enrichment while lying about her legal authority. Several demanded her immediate resignation, while others called for criminal prosecution. Robert Martinez took the microphone to present evidence of the criminal conspiracy charges. He read portions of Corinne's emails planning to force me into bankruptcy, her secret agreements with developers, and her coordination with board members who stood to profit from commercial development of my property. Ladies and gentlemen, your HOA board has operated as a criminal conspiracy designed to steal private property for personal profit, Robert announced to the stunned audience. They have violated state laws, abused their authority, and betrayed the trust of every resident in this community. The board meeting collapsed into chaos as residents demanded answers about other potential corruption and abuse of authority. Several board members attempted to distance themselves from Corinne's actions, claiming they had been unaware of her secret deals with developers. Corinne Williams finally lost control completely, screaming at the crowd about ungrateful residents who did not appreciate her sacrifice and leadership. Her public meltdown was captured on multiple cell phone cameras, and posted to social media within minutes. The meeting ended with an emergency vote removing Karen Williams from the HOA presidency and dissolving all enforcement actions against my property. Board members who had participated in the criminal conspiracy resigned immediately, while others voted to cooperate fully with law enforcement investigation. As the crowd dispersed, several residents approached to apologize for allowing Karen's harassment campaign to continue unchallenged. Many admitted they had suspected her motives, but lacked the courage to confront someone who wielded so much apparent authority. Justice had finally arrived in the most public way possible, witnessed by the entire community that Karen Williams had claimed to represent while systematically betraying their trust. The criminal charges against Karen Williams and 3 other HOA board members were filed 6 weeks after the community meeting that ended her reign of terror. The county district attorney announced that the racketeering and conspiracy case represented the most serious abuse of homeowners association authority in state history. Karen's attempt to steal my family property for personal profit had violated multiple federal and state laws governing nonprofit organizations, fiduciary responsibility, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The evidence Robert Martinez and I had uncovered through legal discovery provided prosecutors with an airtight case that would likely result in significant prison sentences. The civil lawsuit against the HOA was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount that covered all my legal fees plus substantial damages for the emotional distress and harassment I had endured. More importantly, the settlement included a permanent injunction preventing any future HOA interference with my family property and formal recognition of my historical exemption from municipal regulations. The county commissioners voted unanimously to designate my property as a historical landmark, acknowledging the Thompson family's foundational role in establishing Riverside County. A bronze plaque now stands at the entrance to my driveway, commemorating Samuel Thompson's service as the first mayor and his donation of land for community development. The local historical society invited me to speak at their annual meeting about preserving family heritage in the face of modern development pressure. My story had inspired other longtime residents to research their own family histories and assert their rights against bureaucratic overreach. The Riverside Meadows HOA was restructured under court supervision, with new bylaws requiring transparency, democratic governance, and respect for historical property rights. Several residents who had been targeted by Karen's harassment campaign came forward with their own stories of abuse and intimidation. I decided to share my experience publicly through social media and interviews with property rights organizations. The response was overwhelming, with thousands of people sharing similar stories about HOA corruption and abuse of authority. My case had become a symbol of individual resistance against institutional bullying. The most satisfying outcome was personal rather than legal. For the first time in over a year, I could work in my garden, feed my chickens, and maintain my family property without fear of harassment or retaliation. The stress that had triggered health problems and sleepless nights disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. My vegetable garden produced its best harvest in decades that fall, nourished by soil my ancestors had cultivated for over a century. I canned tomatoes and preserved beans using recipes passed down from my grandmother, continuing traditions that Karen Williams had tried to destroy with her violation notices and legal threats. The community that had been divided by Karen's authoritarian leadership began healing through shared recognition of our common interest in protecting property rights and family heritage. Neighbors who had been turned against each other by manufactured conflicts discovered they had more in common than Karen's divide-and-conquer tactics had allowed them to realize. On Thanksgiving morning, exactly 1 year after receiving the eviction notice that had started this entire ordeal, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by historical documents, legal victory letters, and newspaper clippings documenting my successful fight against bureaucratic tyranny. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock that had marked time for 4 generations of Thompson family meals, celebrations, and decisions. Outside my window, the lights of Riverside Meadows twinkled peacefully in houses occupied by neighbors who now understood the true history of their community. Karen Williams was facing federal prison time for her crimes, her reputation destroyed, and her authority permanently revoked. The developers who had conspired with her abandoned their plans for commercial development after losing their inside connection to local government influence. My family land would remain in Thompson hands for future generations, protected by both legal precedent and historical recognition that honored our founding role in building this community. Sometimes the good guys really do win, especially when they fight with the strength of their ancestors behind them.